and I wanted to introduce myself to all of you. My name is Stephanie Silverman, as you've heard, and I'm an executive coach specializing in public speaking, communication, and executive presence. And all of this can really be traced back to the third grade. Here I am playing Antonio in Shakespeare's The Tempest, which I think we'll all agree is a very appropriate third grade play. And from there, I received my MFA from Rutgers University with a few steps in between. After working as a presenter for a national organization, I was asked to share my approach with other speakers there and help them improve their impact and success. So now, 2 decades later, I'm still at it. I've left out a couple of twists and turns in my story, but that should give you a little bit of an understanding of what my background is. I wanted to share that with you and also a little bit about the companies that I've worked with. Here's a sample of some of the corporations that I've worked with, and you can see that they represent vastly different industries, company cultures, and within those I've worked with people at different seniority levels. But the one thing that I've learned is that the best practices that I work with hold up in every situation. And so what I want to do today is to share with you some new insights or refreshers on insights you may already know and an overview of some of the work I do with my individual and group clients and model some of the techniques that I'm demonstrating to you as we go along. So we'll look into ways of being more confident and effective in presentation and communication. I'll share with you some best practices for preparing. Everyone knows being prepared is important, but there's a lot of disagreement on what that actually means, to be prepared. I'll share with you 5 strategies for successful delivery, and hopefully you'll leave with some useful tools and techniques that you can apply straight away on your next occasion. Just a little overview of what we'll be covering. After the introduction, I'll talk about the principles of good presentation and break those out, as well as some challenges that we face in being good at what we're doing. I'll share those 5 strategies that I mentioned. I'll introduce the concept of deliberate practice in terms of how to continue to grow your skills. We'll wrap it up, make it stick, and then take those questions that Christina mentioned. Again, it's going to be kind of a down and dirty 45-minute primer. So without further ado, let's get started. The 3 principles that I highlighted for you are mindset, preparation, and delivery. And what I've found again and again is if your mindset is appropriately placed and your preparation, is strategic and targeted, your delivery automatically becomes that much better. And then all you really need to do is some light polishing. And you'll see how these all relate to one another as we go along. So let's begin with mindset. The question I like to begin with is why we even bother to present anymore. Everybody on this call can read, I presume, and everyone has access to a number of ways of getting information, day and night, 24 hours. And so it begs the question, why stop what you're doing? Why take time away from what is clearly a busy life that we're all living to get together to talk about these things? I'd like to share some of the reasons why. There are many, but beyond just making sure that they actually pay attention to the topic at all, because if you send it to them, you have no way of knowing really if they've read what you've sent. But also you have an opportunity to clarify or simplify complex topics. You can also contextualize the information to make it relevant to the audience to whom you're speaking. Something that you cannot do in a written form is observe, respond, and adjust your material to be most valuable to your audience. One thing that can never be overlooked is the potential influence that you have over how your audience takes in the information that you're sharing. You can talk about a figure, a number, and that can sound astronomical or really insignificant, depending on how you talk about it. Also, you can initiate or reinforce relationships, develop those relationships. And what I mean by association here is become associated with your expertise, become the go-to person, the thought leader on your topic. This is all something that can be more easily established in person or by voice than through written materials. And ultimately, what we're trying to do is give people more than they can reasonably get for themselves. So what that really means is reading aloud to your audience is not an acceptable answer to how to present material. And we've all been subjected to someone standing up and reading aloud. So we have to rise above that and give more to people than what they could get for themselves. But there are challenges to being good at this. One has to do with just our basic self-esteem. We often find ourselves at one end of the spectrum feeling unworthy and poorly prepared. On the other hand, we're screlly, and nobody wants to be screlly, not even screlly probably at this point. What we really want to do is find that healthy, earned entitlement point. We find that the word entitlement gets a bad rap these days because a lot of people claim it when they haven't earned it. But in most cases, especially people who choose to tune into a webinar like this, you have earned it, and now you must own it in order to be able to present it in a way that shows authority and confidence. So just making sure you claim what you own is important. Then it's also very critical that you have a goal that's not vague or misplaced. When I speak to clients about what their goal is in communicating something, it's often focused on their own performance. It's self-focused, which leads to self-consciousness in delivery, which is not ideal. I always think of this quote from Alice in Wonderland where she wants to know what road to take. Since she doesn't know where she's going, any road will successfully get her there. So it's important to set a very specific and clear goal, and that will help you chart a path to getting there. Fear plays a very large role in the challenges that we face as presenters. We don't want to make a mistake. We're afraid of being salesy or coming across as inauthentic, and these are valid concerns, but they tend to interfere with successful delivery. We also don't like the thought that people may be judging us, in which case that may make us more self-conscious than we'd like to be. We also tend to be perfectionists in our communication, and that's problematic because I've yet to hear a unanimous definition of perfect presentation. So it's a goal that, by definition, is impossible to reach. And it leads to some pretty bad practices, like scripting, for example. When you watch somebody who has memorized the script, what you see is basically a virtual page of text going in front of their eyes. They glaze out, and their attention is focused on not forgetting the information that they've remembered. So you're watching someone try to remember text, and that is very boring. I think we can all agree. There are some vocal habits that are challenging as well. Slides have bullets, and often that lures a person into reading them off like an endless list, a grocery list. And that can also create some patterns of speech that can be annoying and that can be very distracting. Uptalk is one of them. If you have a teenager in your life, you've probably heard a lot of this. Everything is asked as a question. It sounds uncertain. It can seem junior. And it's problematic because it doesn't really match the tone or content that you're trying to share. On the other end of the spectrum, sometimes it causes people's voices to bottom out, where they lose their energy before they get to the end of their thought. And this is often resulting from not having proper breath support or from thinking about the next point while you're still busy talking about the point you're on. Ultimately, it can create a sense of disinterest in your own topic. And at the very least, it can cause people to miss the last thought or word in their sentence. I'm trying to do it now, but I've forced myself not to. There are physical tells that we have to watch out for. If you've played poker, you know, or if you're familiar with poker, tells are a giveaway of what's going on inside. If you're feeling nervous, that can manifest itself in your body movement and body language, in your arms and hands. It can cause you to have poor eye contact or no eye contact at all, or just having bad posture that might suggest that you're not confident on your subject matter. One of the most common challenges that I'm asked to address is filler words. None of these on their own are illegal technically, but when they're habitual and repetitive, they can be very distracting, and it's something that we've all been trained to watch out for. So let's dive into what a good presentation is in basic terms. Now that we know some of the things that can get in the way, we'll try to tackle those as we go along. I like to think of the presentation as a value proposition. People are coming for value. They're attending for value, and that value is the regard that something is held to deserve, the importance, worth, or usefulness of something. So what that means in terms of presentation is I need to provide information that whoever's listening is going to be able to use, that they can actually take action with. I need to deliver it with economy, which is not the same as speed. I can't give you 2 hours worth of content in a 45-minute presentation, or you're not going to get much value out of it. It'll be coming at you too quickly. I also need to exert that influence over it so that people know how to think about what it is that I'm sharing with them. And that amounts to the value that I think everyone is seeking. And if I deliver on that, I've done a good job. So I often ask myself, what are they going to be able to do with this information that I share? And that requires thinking of it in terms of a very clear, specific, and observable goal. So you already know what's in it for you. You know why you're talking. Now it's important to consider why your audience is there. Also, you want to know how much time you have to discuss it. It will almost never feel like enough time. So the question, why are they there, is an important one to ask. What do they want or need out of this experience for it to feel valuable? What would be their version of a successful outcome? In what way are we aligned? This is especially true when you're trying to convince something of someone to which they may have some objections. Where is the point of alignment? And then the question that really makes it active is, how will I know if I'm successful? Not just they'll understand information in a different way, because I can't know whether someone else understands something or not, least of all in this environment where I can't even see your faces. So I want to consider a provocative, observable goal, like we'll have an engagement in our Q&A that tells me you're on board. Or if I'm trying to get business, I'll get a second meeting. Or if I'm effective in my presentation, I'll be asked to do media appearances, and that will be an indication that people want more of what I'm giving them. So those are examples of provocative, observable goals that I can strive for. We have our goal in place. Now we get to move on to the preparation phase of the process. And no matter how often I've spoken on the same topic, I like to begin with a brainstorming session. It's very quick, and it's important to know that when you brainstorm, you're not editing, judging, or organizing your material. You're merely slapping your ideas down on the page as quick as they come, and bad ideas, good ideas all get a place. You focus on the what and how. So you can obviously include your key talking points, ways that you might want to visualize your information using graphs, charts, and images. You might want to include analogies or stories, illustrations. I like to think about podcasts that I listen to because I'm an avid podcast listener, or what's happening in our culture today, personal experiences that I've had, and ways of contextualizing, and framing that information so that it has some sort of cohesive, held together quality or theme. After I've spilled out a lot of ideas, and I try to use a note-taking software that allows me to put these down wherever I am, whichever form of device I'm using, so they all end up in the same place. Then I begin to organize, and I just throw it together through judging now and editing my content against the goal that I've set and the time frame that I have. So I ask myself, as I go along, why do they need to know this if I'm considering an idea to include? This helps me weed out things that may be important for me to know, but aren't necessarily useful to my audience at that particular time. That can be helpful when your topic is highly technical and your level of sophistication on the subject is much higher than your audience. This is where you begin to weave in the details, the illustrations, analogies, and references, the way you can include story in a meaningful way and make sure that you have a sense of flow. You can talk through your outline to make sure that you have what it needs to have and that it's following a logical order and that there's some inevitability to its conclusion. Then you go through and cut what does not support your goal, but it's important that you know it. Obviously, you want to be prepared when questions come. Now, this goes against most people's instinct. When I ask people, typically my clients, how they begin their process of working on a presentation, they invariably tell me they begin with the deck, and I'm suggesting that you shouldn't. And I'm also suggesting that if you follow this technique, you'll be able to build your deck faster, believe it or not. Here's the process. So this is an example of a brainstorming session. Then I switch it into an outline with the first number being the key idea and the letters are the supporting points, just like we did in college or high school. And that directly lends itself to the deck. I don't reinvent the wheel. If I have a slide that touches on those subjects, I'll start with that first, but I adapt it to my outline rather than the other way around. So with this technique, the outline follows the way you're thinking about the subject, the deck follows the outline. In this way, the flow is built into your deck, and you have less need for transitions or segues that are often tricky when you have a hard time getting from here to there. So this is one big key. If you're not working this way, give it a try and see if you can streamline your process. You'll find that it's a much easier and more natural way of working. Another thing as you prepare is to anticipate, especially questions that you don't want to get. Hoping that you won't get them is not enough. So it's important to strategize. How are you going to answer those questions? And even take practice runs at answering those questions. Ask for input from others in terms of how they might come at you. And also have some back pocket responses for questions that might be unanswerable, for data that you may not be responsible for having. I always encourage people to work out loud, and this allows you to find errors and challenges that you wouldn't find any other way. It's really proven out again and again. People don't like doing it. They rarely do it, but when they don't do it, it shows. The last thing you want is for the first time you say something to be in a high-stakes situation in front of people. Why not take that first swipe on your own when you have time to make adjustments? It's also helpful to warm up your articulators, especially if you're presenting or having a meeting in the beginning of the morning. You may not have spoken too much, and your articulators may be tired, and you may stumble over your words a lot, which could perhaps make you seem less authoritative on your subject. So those are all pieces of the preparation process, and then this dovetails nicely into the third piece, which is the delivery, and I'm offering you up 5 little strategies to enjoy. And the first one is probably the most important one for me, and that has to do with how you pace your information. You see this woman trying to eat a sandwich in one big bite, and it's not going to taste very good, and it's going to be hard to swallow. Information is the same way. If you turn on the fire hose and expect people to get hydrated, all they're going to do is get a face full of water. Enough with the analogies, you get the idea. So what I'm suggesting to you is that you cluster each idea, that you complete each idea before you move on to the next. This is a way of keeping things from seeming like an endless list. And as you'll notice, I animate each bullet. That helps me pace myself. It makes sure that you're where I want you to be at every point in this presentation, and I'm not tempted to just tick off every single item in a list of bullets and make it sound like one of those lists that we talked about. This allows me to apply fresh energy to each point so that it doesn't cause me to go up or down at the end of my thoughts or treat each bullet point with the same energy. And it also lets me take a pause to think between points and to take a quick breath. But it takes getting used to this approach. Believe it or not, it's not really a natural thing. What it will do, and I have some techniques that I use with my clients to help them develop this skill. It feels artificial at first, but I've been doing it throughout this presentation so far. Now you can pay attention and see if you can notice how. What it does is it prevents you from feeling like your presentation is a marathon where you start at the beginning and you're running till the end. Rather, it's like a series of quick sprints or a relay where you relay around one idea, you complete it, you take that breath, and you tee up the next idea. This keeps it fresh, and it allows people to digest and swallow each bit of information as you go along. And the great thing about this is it's one of the best ways to begin to eliminate some of the filler and those vocal patterns that I was talking about earlier. There's no better way that I've found in 20 years. So when you can work this technique into your presentation, you'll find those stripped away. And I challenge you to pay attention to me and see how often I use filler words. I am applying the same strategy here. So pacing is critically important, as well as body language. I mentioned those tells earlier. Now, an interesting study was conducted by Albert Morabian. He wanted to measure trust in first impressions. How do people determine trust? And what he determined was that it falls into three basic categories: what we say, our tone of voice, and body language. But what people found surprising was the proportions. Basically, as you saw there, your body language and tone of voice trump what you say. So how you say it trumps what you say. That's really significant, and people don't like that because they want the words to carry all the weight. But when it comes to trust, your body language matters. But when you're presenting, you have all this extra energy, too much energy sometimes, and it has to go someplace. People typically respond to that energy in one of two ways. They either bind that energy up and hold on to themselves for dear life, put their hands locked behind their back like in the hostage position, jam them in their pockets, grip the podium for dear life, or they burn that energy and they pace around and they try to wave their hands in the air, or they shift their body weight from one foot to the other. It's best to identify, who am I? Am I a binder or am I a burner? And then begin to try to practice stillness when I notice myself incorporating these recovery strategies for the too much energy syndrome. So if I find myself gripping myself, I need to return to a still position. If I find myself having nervous energy that I'm burning off, I need to try to get still. These are things that you can apply to deliberate practice, which is something I'll get to very shortly. And in relationship to body language, it is really a part of body language, is facial expression. It's a key in trust as well. And what studies have shown is that facial expressions of another person being incongruent with linguistic information not only evoke unpleasantness, but also decreased trustworthiness toward that person. So in other words, what that means is if your face doesn't match your tone and content, you're not to be trusted. And I'll tell you something, babies know this long before they learn language. It seems to be something that's relatively hardwired into our being, that if we feel the tone and facial expression don't match, we tend to go with what we see over what we hear, and that can lead to the wrong type of conclusion. So this is something that you also may want to get some feedback on and begin to address. If you happen to have one of those, I won't say the word, but negative resting faces, let's just say. If you look concerned all the time, if that's your natural facial expression, you may want to loosen up your face a little bit and work on getting your facial expression and tone to match. Following along, the concept of eye contact is something that everybody agrees is a best practice, but people have funny ways of managing it. It can be nerve-wracking. So people try to look just over everyone's head and sweep their eyes along, or they overdo it and lock onto somebody with their eyes and don't let up, and it feels a little creepy. I find that the best way to make sure that neither of those things happen and you're really using eye contact to your best ability is, rather than feeling like you're the object of everyone's scrutiny, everyone's paying attention to me and judging me, and they're all looking at me, I think, wait a minute, I'm looking at them. My eye is a camera, and I'm collecting valuable, critical information from all the people that I'm seeing, and I'm making those adaptations and adjustments that we talked about at the very beginning in terms of why we even bother to communicate this way. And I'm maximizing the engagement and the effectiveness of my communication based on that information that I'm drawing in. When I do this, and obviously in this format it's not possible, but I can imagine based on my other experiences, when I'm collecting that visual data from those people who are listening, it's really more of a conversation. My part is verbal and their part is nonverbal, but I'm responding to it in the same way that I might if they were saying what they were feeling rather than just showing it. So I used eye contact very, very meaningfully. And I try to complete a thought with one person, then go to the next person, look for their reaction, and adjust in a subtle way. And in that way, I'm having individual little conversations with everybody in the room. And it also keeps me from being too self-conscious. Another way to avoid self-consciousness that's directly related to the purpose of communicating in this way is to act as a guide. Your message is the star. You are not really the star. Even if you're the CEO of your company, you're the face of the company, what your company is about and why you do what you do is the star. And the better you represent that, the better it will reflect on you as well. I don't want to go to a tour of the Taj Mahal and only remember the tour guide. What I really want to remember is all the unique and amazing things about the Taj Mahal. If my tour guide was exceptional, I'll also remember him or her for doing such a great job of bringing that to me. But if I act as a responsible, engaged, enthusiastic guide, the message will get through and I will be reflected upon in a positive way. So those are the 5 strategies to begin with, and just scratching the surface really. But I mentioned deliberate practice a moment ago, and I wanted to share with you a little bit about that. When you see baseball players, for example, playing a game, you know that they practice extensively to prepare for these games, but you don't see them playing one game of baseball after another, hoping that general improvement will occur in every aspect of their game. No, what you see is specific types of practice: batting practice, fielding practice, pitching practice. They identify specific skills that need to be strengthened, and they apply time and strategy to those skills. And what Anders Ericsson has come up with, that he calls deliberate practice, is really just the definition of that approach to skill building, where rather than practicing a presentation just over and over again with the hope of general improvement, you choose your focus skill, you practice it diligently with that one skill in mind, you evaluate your success, you make adjustments, refocus, and then apply that to practicing that skill again. It's helpful if you videotape yourself or get someone who you trust to give you some feedback, but you identify, got to take a little sip of water here. You identify that skill that you're trying to focus on. So maybe you have a tendency to always go overtime. You want to make sure that you come in on time. Maybe you want to adjust your energy or speed. Maybe you speak too quickly, which is typical of anyone presenting. So maybe just slowing down and pacing in that example that I gave you of breaking up those ideas and taking a little pause between is something you want to focus on. You may want to adjust your body language. Maybe you discovered that you're a burner and you want to calm yourself down. So you target that. You go over a few slides with that specific skill in mind. And as a nice little side effect, you'll also become much more familiar with your content as you go along, even though you're not focusing on that. That's also how actors prepare for performances. People always say, oh, how do you memorize all that content? Well, we don't really focus on memorizing the content. We work on specific things to do in the play, and the content works its way in that way for the most part. So the deliberate practice approach is very useful, and it tends to result in much higher spikes in improvement than just that general over and over again approach. I'd like to just wrap it up. That's been a very quick primer, as I mentioned, but I want to remind you that we covered mindset, that it's important to consider why we are even doing this to begin with and what our audience needs. Setting that goal in a way that's going to set us up for an active, engaged presentation that will be meaningful to the audience, where there's a clear idea of what we will need to be successful. Brainstorming content, thinking creatively without judgment, organizing that information, editing for flow and considering the needs of the audience and time frame, and again, letting the ideas build the outline and the outline build the deck, and it's faster, then delivering with broken up small bits of information, pauses to think, and an opportunity to observe your listener, make adjustments, and guide. And finally, applying deliberate practice specifically and in a focused way to what it is that you are trying to improve. And I got so focused on mine that I didn't advance my slides, but you see all of these and they're in the handout as well. So now's a chance to make it stick. I would recommend to you to identify what key learnings you may have come away with from this very brief primer, and also write down 3 challenge areas that you're aware of to which you might be able to apply deliberate practice based on some of the challenges that I've shared with you. So as I mentioned, this is just a sample of the work that I do with my clients to help them grow their communication skills. And I hope that it's gotten you thinking and that you now have a few things to try in your next presentation. I want to thank you for taking the time to join me, and we have a little bit of time now to throw it back to Christina for a few questions.
Awesome. I learned a lot. That was really great. Thank you so much. If anyone listening has a question, feel free to pop it into the question panel, in the control panel. We did have one come in already, which is great. So, how do I deal with being nervous immediately before giving a presentation?
Well, that is something that I find can be challenging for everyone, no matter what their level of success or experience. And we've all heard the stories of the amount of effort and preparation that professional presenters put into presentation. One thing I would like to point out is that total relaxation before a presentation is not the desired state to be in. When I'm too relaxed before a presentation, I begin to wonder if I really care about the outcome. A little bit of nervousness is an indication that you've got skin in the game, that you care about a successful outcome. And I have become accustomed to embracing that feeling a little bit as a reminder that I care about what's about to happen. And I also recognize that a little bit of nervousness is the same thing as a little bit of that extra energy we talked about. And extra energy is actually required to be an engaging presenter and holding the attention of a group of people for a period of time. So harnessing some of what you might feel is nervous energy is a much stronger goal than trying to diminish or eliminate nerves altogether. However, for some people, those nerves can get a little bit out of control. And in those cases, practicing aloud ahead of time can really help to diminish it, because you have a little bit of muscle memory of going through this information aloud and on your feet. And so that's something that you can rely on as past experience. Another thing that you can do if the breathing really feels like it can get out of control is developing some breathing exercises. I work on a number of different exercises with my clients in order to recalibrate the central nervous system and slow the whole system down in advance of a presentation. And that's something you can train your body to do. There are a number of things you can do, but I think the practicing out loud and embracing a tiny bit of nervousness is something that once you get accustomed to it, you begin to rely on as the energy, the gas in your tank that you're going to need to get going.
Really helpful. Thank you. Another question. How do I deal with being too verbose or wordy when I speak?
That's a common problem, and I've seen that come up again and again. I often call it the syndrome of not taking yes for an answer. If you are giving good eye contact to people you're speaking to, and they're giving you enthusiastic nods in return to what you're saying, your point has been received and it's been essentially agreed to. That's a great indication to stop. And this is something that you have to discipline yourself on, is looking for those nonverbal cues. Sometimes they're verbal. Sometimes people will say, yes, I've got it. And yet we still feel compelled to keep going. So beginning to recognize those cues and sit on that temptation to keep going. I sometimes have my clients write down little notes for themselves when they know that they're going to be in an environment that will encourage hyperverbosity to write little notes to themselves to say stop and wait. and see if whatever else they were going to say still feels important and needs to be shared after they've waited for someone else to have the floor for a moment, or to let that point that they've made sit. Another way of tackling this is through practicing out loud, because if you practice your thoughts out loud, you'll start to notice if you're freestyling, if you're just going down rabbit holes and getting too caught up in examples. Begin to be tough on yourself, record yourself, and then review it and say, was that absolutely necessary? How many examples of this is essential for people to get the idea, and how many is too many? And I think the conventional wisdom is any more than 3 examples of anything tends to go into overkill territory. And a last thought about that, there are many ways to approach this, but you may want to solicit a trusted friend or colleague to help signal you when you're going too far. If they're in a meeting or a presentation or even in a rehearsal, create a sign where they can indicate to you, you've said enough on that, time to move on, and that can help you retrain your instincts.
Love that last tip. That was great. Another question. Can you please add some color to the deliberate practice approach and its meaning?
Yes. I'm very excited about deliberate practice. It makes so much sense, but it's not something we typically apply. So I think that one of the areas that deliberate practice can address very effectively is this pausing and breaking up of ideas, concepts. I have a look and lift technique that I use to work with my clients to help them develop this reflex of how to work off of material in a easy way that keeps them on track. Setting up a camera or setting up a person to evaluate, never a mirror, by the way. Mirrors are too much immediate feedback while you're trying to focus on other things. It becomes very distracting. If anyone's tried it, I'm sure you've had that experience. But setting up a video saying, okay, during the next, I'm going to go through these challenging slides and I'm going to apply this technique of breaking up my ideas, addressing one bullet point, taking a pause, a breath, then addressing the next bullet point, and making it very extreme in its rigor. So it's not the way I will deliver the presentation, but it's focusing specifically on getting comfortable with breaking up these ideas. So to use a slide from my presentation, let's say I'm going to speak about, let me find one here, brainstorming. So the first bullet says, don't edit, judge, or organize. So I will have my video camera on, and I will look into my camera, and I will say, don't edit, judge, or organize. Then I'll stop, take a breath, clear my mind, look at the next bullet point, look back at the camera, and address that bullet point. Focus on what and how. So, and then I'll elaborate on that point a little bit and then stop. Then I look back down at my notes. Key talking points. Then I'll elaborate a little bit about that. So I'm forcing myself to break these pieces of information down into their smallest units so that I'm able to deliver them with uniqueness and specificity, and it doesn't end up sounding like eggs, milk, cheese, bread, all equal in their importance. They're all very different, these bullet points, and they deserve different treatment. Similarly, if I'm applying deliberate practice to my physicality, I might say, okay, I don't care how I treat the content really at all. I'm just going to try to present this next slide or two with a focus on how to use my hands in a meaningful way so that they're not locked at my sides, but they're also not flailing around. So I'm going to use my hands to build physical images of what it is that I'm talking about as I'm speaking. And it might end up being ridiculous, but I'm giving that time to focusing on how my hands might be useful to me in helping to reinforce the message that I'm conveying. Then I go back and I look at it and I say, okay, that was too much, or actually that felt like a lot, but it looks really good. This is something that I could use and start to incorporate some of these hand gestures that are meaningful to what I'm saying and connected to my points that aren't just about random energy being expelled through my hands. So could be a topic of an entire webinar on its own, but I hope that that gives some more concrete ideas about how you might be able to use it, and you're really looking for signs of improvement. You go through it a few times, you see if you become more comfortable with it, if you start to find things that are useful, then you can move on to a different challenge area.
That was great. Thank you so much. So those were all the questions that we had for now. I'll give just a minute if anyone has a question that they'd like to submit before we end. And to note, the handout is still uploaded into the control panel if anyone wants to access it now. We'll also be sending out the recording as well as the slides at the end of the presentation. So keep a lookout for that. No other questions had been submitted, so we'll give you a few more minutes back in your day. Thank you so much, Stephanie. This was really, really helpful. And thank you to everyone who's tuned in today, and hope to see you at the next one.
Thank you.